Hello, everybody, and welcome back to TTP at Home, where once a month we bring in one of our satellite speakers that's been making the rounds so that no matter where you are, any Texan can listen in and be a part of True Texas Project. And today we have a little surprise for you, so stay tuned. All right, everybody, welcome back. Today, we have a great surprise for you. You may notice that there is nobody on this stage that looks anything like Fran Rhodes. We have three gentlemen with us today, a lot of testosterone here, which is why I deliberately wore floral, okay? I am the lone female here, but let me introduce to you who we have. We have our main guest is Mike Sonneveldt. He is with Self-Evident Ministries. You guys probably recognize him. He spoke at our 15-year anniversary, and you have spoken actually several times in the years past, along with Massey Campos, Self-Evident Ministries. And one thing before I get to the other gentleman, I just want to say again publicly thank you, because you guys probably remember with our 15-year anniversary party, there was a lot of pushback from the media, a lot of people canceling us, and like a true, strong alpha male. Mike, you were one of the first ones that you didn't just stick with us. You publicly came out and said, this is why I'm sticking with them and I'm not going to change my mind. So thank you so much for that.
No problem.
So also we have my husband, Fred McCarty, is here with us. You want to talk about an alpha male? He can handle me, so that should tell you a little bit about Fred. And then we have Corey Huddleston, who has been with way back in the Tea Party days. So he's been with us probably almost all 15 years. And you have a special passion, I think, for turning boys into men. Absolutely. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Mike, you have been touring and making the rounds at our different satellites talking about the men America needs. So I want to have, as opposed to a lecture today, I want to have a conversation with men about where things are lacking and what we need and how we can help and what's going on. So why don't you just kind of kick us off?
So I think to kick off the conversation between all of us, I think the best place to start is really where we recognize guys are today. Now, I know it gets cliche, right? But I think all of us witness it, we watch it, we recognize socially, culturally, all that, and especially Corey, if your passion is to raise young men into men, that's mine as well. And so I'm going to throw it to all of us of, hey, okay, what's the status of men today, and where do we go from there, especially, whether it's Texas, I'm from Florida, like all around the U.S., there's good and there's bad, and people tend to swing the extremes. So I want to hear from you guys. What do you think you're seeing that's good, and what do you think you're seeing that's bad so far?
I think that's a great question.
Like good in regard to what? Like
men. Like tell us where are we at with men today? Why would we even need to be discussing the men America needs? Do we already have the men we need? Where are we at?
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty obvious that we don't. I think we kind of live in a bubble where we're surrounded by activists a lot. And so it's kind of
a Texan world. Activists, right?
Yeah, like Texas activists. We kind of live in a bubble. And then when you get out and talk to what we call normies, it's kind of shocking how low info people are.
Right.
And the average guy is kind of, real passive, just kind of leave me alone, don't bother me. And they just don't seem to grasp the actual fight that we're in. We're in a lifelong fight. You got to get up your butt and you got to really, you've signed up whether you realize it or not for a lifelong fight against what's going on today. And people just don't seem to grasp that. There's a lot of hyper individualism and people put their faith in guns and stuff. I see that a lot, especially here in Texas. Gun culture is huge. And just owning guns isn't being political. You're going to have to do more than that. You have to do more than vote. You're going to have to get up and you're going to have to hold people responsible. You have to hold our leaders responsible. You have to be a leader in your community. You have to get people in your church involved.
So you're saying you don't see men doing that. Corey, what's
not
your
nearly as much.
Right.
There's people like that, but not nearly as much.
Corey, what's your take? Because I think you focus more on the younger generation. Like it has to start at home.
So I used to focus more on the men side, like thinking that was going to change the problem. But what I realized is like men as a whole, like we like to find things out on our own. So like admitting guilt, or not guilt, but like maybe a lack of something, publicly is not always the easiest thing. And so what I found is like being able to actually change the future of masculinity really does start with giving the boys like a vision for what that actually looks like. And so being able to come alongside them, I think problem wise, what we're looking at masculinity wise is that there's nobody showing them how to come up. It's not, I don't think inherently like generations are bad or good because that's just the way that it turned out. It's like it tends to have to do with the input that they have that's leading them to that outcome. And I think a lot of times it's easy for us to point at like, oh, this next generation is screwed. But the reality is we did that. So, that's to me the root of it all. It's like, what's the example that we're setting as we live by these things, And that also means that sometimes I've got to be the mean dad or the bad dad and say, hey, we're not playing video games, or hey, you're not doing this, or hey, you're not doing that, or not having a phone, right? In today's world where like it's almost like child abuse in their mind, I mean, just that they're being left out from those. But I take a lot of pride in that we do like more systematic trying to understand our kids. And what I found is like a lot of those things that I don't want them engaging in have like tremendous consequences on how they engage the world around them.
Right.
So when you pull that stuff away from them and you don't allow them to be on the video game, you'll notice tremendous change in the way that they engage with the people around them, the food that we eat. Like you think that colored food, things like that don't matter, but that type of thing, we're just feeding it to our kids. We're not even thinking about it. We think that it's just treats, and it's poison, and it's literally poisoning the way that they engage in the world around them. And I mean, those are just fundamental aspects, right, about our next generation. But
So what can you do with that? So you have these views of people that are just going about their daily lives, and you focus in on this. So what do you do with this?
Well, and that's, you raised something really important. There aspect. Let me ask this: how old are you, man? How old are you?
46.
46. Okay, I'm 38, right? Yeah. And one of the things that I'm witnessing is there seems to be this resurgence of guys right within our age group who are like, okay, I got to figure out what it means to be a man. And you pointed out kind of there's this passivity, there's this lack of action that's going on, right? And we kind of notice it in our parents, and I love my dad, but my dad was never politically active. He had opinions, he's conservative opinions, but he was never active. He was never pushing, and just very quiet, kind of passive guy, and did his thing and all of that. And I feel like right around our generation, and I notice this especially in social media, like X, Instagram, all of that, there is this movement of guys about our age that are going, no, I've got to figure this out. I've got to become active, and I've got to raise the next generation. And what's cool is you're seeing the younger generation of guys, they're hungry for it. So when you tell the guys, dude, stop eating junk, right? Like that stuff is poisoning you. And you're right. It does so much more to us than we expect.
Are you saying they're receptive to that?
They are, because I've noticed at least the younger generation guys, now maybe it's confirmation bias because they're running in similar spheres, but I've noticed overall there are plenty of young guys who they've lost identity or they've never gained identity. And so they're searching around trying to figure out, okay, what's my identity? And it's kind of like when you're young, you might not consciously recognize fake, but at least subconsciously you're recognizing fake. And I think they're waking up and recognizing, okay, there's something more. And a perfect example of this is this whole muscular Christianity movement, right? And there seems to be a sweep movement of especially young men back towards like Catholicism or Orthodox Church.
I have noticed that.
Reform,
Yeah.
right? There's this wave, and it's very much young guys that are like, no, I need to be a part of something strong and convicted and on principle. I need to be,
So you're saying they're finding that in an
fine-
Orthodox kind of a church,
yeah, because
for better or for worse.
and not knocking, say, the Protestant church in the West, but with the Orthodox Church, with the Catholic Church, you see this lineage, you see this tradition, you see this strength of hierarchy, and I think young guys are attracted to that because it's like, oh, that's stable, that's strong, that, and the Crusades have become something of a focal point, or the joke online is like men are thinking about Rome, right? Why are we thinking about Rome? Why are we thinking about history of the Crusades? It's because we're looking for something that is strong and stabilizing and survives these crazy waves of wokeness and
Do you think it has something to do with Protestant church being kind of feminized?
yeah, absolutely. Now I may make some people mad here, but it's like because I grew up Reformed, but it was kind of light Reformed, right? And then I moved from Reformed over to like Assemblies of God, and then swung back into like more of a we called it Baptist-costal. It's like kind of right down that line, right? But I've watched the Protestant, the evangelical movement, and there's this massive backlash against, especially what they've termed Big Eva, and I think that's part of it for this younger generation. They're like, I'm so tired of soft guys trying to lead me into becoming a man,
So you think there's a correlation between being a strong man and saving our nation and having a strong faith?
Absolutely. I mean, and I want to hear your guys' thoughts, but I think it's that old adage that we've probably all heard, right? Strong men produce good times produce weak men produce hard times produce strong men. And I think we're kind of in that stage of we're in bad times, and the weak men have led us here. And so now you're seeing that generation raise up of like, no, we need strong men again.
Well, what that tells me is there's hope.
There, absolutely.
And I'm so tired of being told there's no hope because all the men are so weak and all the women are so woke and there's no hope. But there is hope because it is cyclical.
Well, and let's put it to you guys, like, what are you guys seeing that's in the hope? There's got to be examples of hope. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure to that point, I think like if you just look historically, biblically, I don't know if you're a Christian, it's hard to like really say you're a believer and just not know that it's already under our control. I mean, like so many times in the scripture, there were multiple times where somebody was at their end, like they had nothing left. There was no way out, and then God showed up, right? So like I like to go back to Gideon, but like just the constant like, hey, get rid of those guys, and it's like half of his army is gone, and then it's like, yeah, now it's like go get some water, and all the guys that drink, like savages, like get them out of there, and like get the ones that that have some semblance of like, they know what they're doing, or they're taking care of themselves and their surroundings, and we'll keep them. It's like 300 guys, but God always comes through, and it's always at the point where all the experts know that it's not going to work out. That's why it's, to me, like whenever we talk about conservative or Democrat even coming around, it's like when people talk about we'll never have another conservative president. It was like, okay, yeah, it's only a matter. It's just like it's all like we might as well be sitting around talking about fairies coming out of the wall, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing? So you're on social media all the time. What are you seeing in the men?
Hey, that's a shot.
Sorry.
You are always on your phone.
Yeah, but
when you're not working on your car.
Well, like one of the good things that I see is the younger generation. I guess we call them Gen Z. Would be what our daughter is. Like I'm involved with an organization where I'm exposed to college age men, and they're like they're completely different than what I was like when we were in college. It's a different world. They seem to realize that they're much more purposeful. They have a plan. They get there and they know exactly what they want to graduate in. I didn't know what I wanted to do until like the last semester of college, and none of them are like that anymore. They know that that you're going to have to. The forces are trying to keep lined against you to keep you from being successful. Like the world that I graduated college in is completely gone. It was just kind of a given that, where I'm going to move to Dallas and I want to make a bunch of money and just live happily and buy a house and have a pretty wife.
Thanks.
We just all kind of took those things for granted, and these guys don't. I mean, they know that it's going to be a fight for everything. And so
and that's
I think
not even in a Christian circle. Like the guys you're working with aren't necessarily.
They're not necessarily Christian.
Yeah.
That's just your average, college age Texas
Are you seeing
guy.
that? Where
yeah.
It's not just a Christian thing. It's.
Yeah, and it's funny because like you describe basically my upbringing as well. Like I was expected to go to college. I went to college. I had no clue what I was doing, right? Yeah. And I always admired those guys who are like, I'm going to be a doctor when they're 5 years old and they end up doing it, right? And I was just kind of floundering, but that's also because I had been coddled by the system, right? The system had just walked me from spot to spot to spot.
Yeah, we had a functioning system back then.
We did.
That took care of its own.
You
just don't have that anymore.
And I think, you look at it, here's a perfect analogy for that. When my parents were growing up, a house was an asset. You bought a house, it raised in value. And then I was just coming of age when the 2008 crash happened. So what my generation saw was, oh, wait, that's not an asset. That could be a liability. Because we saw plenty of our parents get crushed in 2008.
Interesting.
So all of a sudden, my generation was like kind of in that floundering stage of like, oh, wait, maybe things aren't as stable as they appear to be. And then we've watched, especially the government system and then the educational system, freaking fall off a cliff. And I think the next generation, the ones who are in college right now, the ones who are in high school right now, like they've witnessed all that and they've grown up with all that and they've realized, like you're saying, the system's not going to take care of me. I got to figure this out. And to me, that's super encouraging because you're witnessing the growth and maturity of a lot of organizations that are trying to help young men figure it out and grow. But the young men seem to have more of a purpose to them, more of a drive, right? And you get plenty of them that are off in the spaces, but it's exciting to me because I love that you brought up Gideon. Like, just as an aside, the Lord has been nailing me with Gideon for like the past month, and this is probably the 5th or 6th confirmation of Gideon in the past like
way to go, Corey.
3 weeks. So yeah, but you nailed it because I've been thinking a lot about this concept of the remnant, right? That small remnant of guys who the Lord picks to move forward. And I can't help but see like he's shaping that remnant of guys, those stronger guys, the ones who are willing to say what they need to say and be heard, and they're not going to care about what society says of them. They're not going to care how the system comes back at them, and they're going to push forward.
So that's huge to not care what society thinks of you or what you're saying or what you're like, when you're making the circuit and you're talking to our groups, like what, I mean, it's one thing for a parent to be sitting in the audience and listening to you, but how do they actually do it? Like what's the answer? Like,
and I think it's one of those things where if you've got a young man, and this is my thought about it. If you've got a young man and you're a parent, then you can't force them to do something, right? But encouraging them in seeking out this direction or this world. And it may not look perfect to the parent, right? But if your kid brings home a Jocko podcast or even a Joe Rogan podcast, like some parents, there's some bad stuff on there. Joe Rogan interviews some bad. Yeah, but Joe Rogan also interviews some really great men, right? And when you go down the Joe Rogan hole, you're going to start meeting other guys who are high value guys, right? And there's a whole world out there of products in the form of podcasts and videos and all of that, and programs and organizations that, I know for me, I found by falling down the rabbit hole. And I think sometimes parents get a little bit nervous about that. Like, oh no, my kid's listening to Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan. It's like, trust me, he does much better with that than hauling off watching anime and playing video games all day.
Yeah.
So.
We had goofy sitcoms.
Yeah.
Kids.
Yeah, that was our entertainment. And I think, Corey, with what you do, that's a valuable question to you too. Of what do those parents? What do they look for? What do they do? How do they ensure that their son raises up and all that?
Yeah, for me, it's been with my own, because I have a 12-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. So, and that's been really the goal, or the question has been like, how do I prepare them for something that I don't know what's even coming? Like when my son was born, and I remember very specifically asking that question, and I felt like the Lord was like, I felt like I had done something wrong by having my son.
Wow.
Like it was this weird, like I did like something shameful by bringing this kid into the world to suffer, And I remember very specifically praying about that, and I heard the Lord say, you think I gave you your son to be a victim of the world? I gave you your son to be a solution to it. And it was like, just in that moment, everything just shifted like 180 degrees. And I was like, all right, how do I do that? And that became my mission, was like, really like, how do I reverse engineer that? And so, like a lot of it, as I've gotten older and really kind of, I guess, forged out what that actually looks like as I've brought up my own kids, it comes down to making sure, like, I want to raise them like spies, basically, so that's how I think of it. Like if I'm raising them like CIA agents, like, so one, I want them to not have too much of an attachment to anything in this world, right? So not to say that I don't want them to have attachments to things, but I want them to understand the difference between how something we perceive. You were talking about January 6th earlier, like that for me was a big perception shifter of maybe this government isn't as much my friend as I think that it is. It was like a wake-up call for that. And so it just shifted everything in the way that I saw the world. It was an anchor. And then you mentioned earlier, like too, about like, as a strong man a Christian or whatever it was. I think that there's definitely strong men that aren't Christian in terms of how we would perceive a strong man. But I think in terms of that, the real answer to that question is it all stems from identity. Like who we perceive ourselves to be, because when the real strength needs to be there, and I think that's why we're seeing so many people like Joe Rogan and all these guys have this conversation, is they're realizing how everything they thought was real isn't, and their bottom has nowhere to grab, and so they're like in freak out mode of like, well, there's got to be something more. And I think that's what that really comes down to. It's like wherever that collision happens, where it's just like it's the ground zero, that's where, to me, like our identity comes in, and then that's where we build from. Like, so it's like the foundation, right? So being able to raise our kids in that environment to where we teach them about the real things that are going to happen, even though they're hard sometimes, and trust them to trust in the Lord and ask that question, like, who am I in you? I think is where they begin to get that freedom, and then also in skill set development. So I focus highly on like their identity and how they can have a relationship with the Lord, but also in like, how do I train you in communication and sales? Like, how do I train you to evaluate a company? How do I get you reading 56 books a year, which they do all of those things, right? So it's like,
I've also seen pictures of you and your kids swimming in the lake in the wintertime.
Oh yeah, I've been told this. Now I push them too. Yeah.
What's that all about?
Well, like usually if it snows, I love it because I'm like, all right, who wants to go swim in the lake? So anything we can do that's like crazy or whatever, it's like I'm always pushing them because I want them to know, like, you're not like other kids. They get mad at me right now because I don't treat them like other kids. But
yeah,
like the other thing is like, what are you really capable of?
Yes.
Like, you could be like every other kid if I just let you sit there and eat donuts and do nothing but sabotage your brain with video games, but like, I want to see what you have inside, and I want you to have like a very strong foundation to run on. So,
and when you put those stories on social media, Facebook, and we read them, and you get like all these likes and way to go, Corey, that's awesome. And why aren't other people doing that? Like they could do what you're doing. They could push their kids, challenge their kids.
I think a lot of it has to do with a parent, or from a parent's perspective, is they don't feel comfortable, right? Like, so there's like, well, I wasn't shown it. And so for me, I think the big shift was, there's some people that whenever you teach them how to disciple, for example, or whatever else, they're like, oh, we're going to disciple each other because we never had dads, or we never, I've heard guys say that before. It irritates me because I'm like, the world's burning down and you're all over here trying to lick your own wounds. It's the weirdest thing. It's like, but it's a lot of what's happening now. It's like there's this predisposed mindset culturally that, like, how big of a victim can I be? Like, can you make me? Like, that's going to make me into like an acceptable human being, is if I can be a bigger victim, And you see it now too with kids. Like, I see this with my own son. It's like, I think I might have ADD. And I'm like, what? Where are you getting this from? And it's like, it's like, he comes home telling me this and he goes, no, the kids at school, one kid has it. And then, so, he was telling me about it, and so I think I have it. And it's like they're all so quick to put labels on each other.
Yeah.
It's contagious, like being bisexual. Like all of a sudden,
it's the label thing. It's like how like what label can I get? And I'm like, this whole idea of being told about. I always use this phrase: don't let people who have no idea who they are define who you should be. Like, so if they've got green hair and they don't know if they're a man or a woman or a cat or a human, or whatever it is, and it's like you have no part in defining any part of my reality. It's just not going to happen. So I think we just got to start kind of calling the common sense. Just like, you're not like, you don't live the life that I want my kids living. So you have no input into it, period. Like, and as a man, you just draw that line,
I think you nailed a couple of things. First off, identity in Christ. And it's kind of funny because, we laugh a little bit about the transgender or the bisexual or ADD stuff, but why is a kid doing that? Identity. I've got to find my identity in the crowd, right? And you nailed it of, it's so important to find identity in Christ, especially raising young men to figure out that's your first identity. And the second thing you pointed out is really your example, right? The father actively raising the son to, this is how you be a man, right? And one of the things that I talk about is, we as men, what is our job in raising our son? It's to bring him out into the chaos and teach him how to handle chaos, right? You're going out into the jungle. There are going to be risks. There are going to be dangers. So my job raising you is to teach you how to handle those risks and dangers. Mom's job is to create the home so that you have a safe place to come back to, and you can be nourished and rest up and go back out, right? And so we as fathers, and I think what we're witnessing especially is like, we're trying to figure ourselves out so that we can raise our sons properly, right? And man, we better have our act together if we're going to raise proper sons. And it's funny because, like, I think for a lot of us growing up, we weren't necessarily super active with our father, right? And there were plenty of guys who were, right? Their dad took them hunting regularly, showed them how to work on the car, and those guys were probably a step ahead. I know for me, like, there was a shift that I had to have with my son when he was really little. I've got a gym set up in my garage, and there would be a bit of annoyance because when I used to compete, it was like focus, drive, energy, right? And I had to shift that because it's like, wait a second, do I want my son coming out and feeling, oh, this is dad's spot, I should back off, or do I want him enjoying it and learning and growing? So there really was this realization of like, what am I doing here? No, I got to include him. So he'll come out and I won't necessarily stop what I'm doing, but as soon as the set is done, it's like, hey, grab a 5 pound, let's do something, let's do some body squats together. And he may only be there for 5 minutes and he'll run off and do his thing, but I'm very intentional now with him of, I want him to look back at his childhood and say, man, my dad taught me stuff. My dad brought me in. And I mean, like, jumping in the lake in the middle of winter is like, dude, that's a memory that a young man will look back on as like, man, my dad really taught me the ropes, it was something unique. And I think that's the other thing that parents really have to focus on is that's for dads. Are dads actively raising their son, Or are they letting the school system do it, and they're letting social media do it, and they're letting the church do it? You know, oh, well, I bring him to Sunday school and they teach him on Sunday and he's good. No.
Right.
Well, I think too, on the side of, you know, part of that is like a lot of these kids aren't equipped because they've never been put in a situation where they're experiencing real hard things. And then also like their own ability to lead within that, right? So it's like when I take Emery out, for example, when we go on any adventure, especially if we're mountain biking or something like that. But earlier on, even, you know, when he was younger, I'd have him get in the front and be like, all right, listen to me, I'm going to let you lead. But I made it like this important thing, you know, it wasn't just like you're leading the mountain bike thing, but it's like, if wherever you go, we go. Like, so if you lead us down the wrong way, we're all going down that way. So a leader will accept that, you know, responsibility for that failure, and then turn around and say, we're going to get out of here, and then lead us back to the right path. Or you can just ignore it and hope that we don't catch it and turn around and like that. That's one way to do it, but I'm pretty sure you'll get caught. You know, so I was constantly trying to use every situation as a way to train him for a hard thing, and like to understand the importance of leadership, and even still when we do things. But I think like it's just a matter of skills that these guys aren't leading. Like I noticed even with Emery, you know, like if something goes down and it like makes him confront an emotional thing, like we don't have that healthy yet, you know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of like he get upset and then run up to his room or something like that. So I'm like, okay, now that's just something we've got to learn better, you know? So you're never going to know it all. That's the one thing. And no matter how much I always thought I was trying to get away from being, having regret and how I raised my kid, I don't think you ever get away from that, you know?
No.
So I want to change focus a little bit, because it's true, we should be raising sons. We don't have a son, so
We have a daughter.
we have a daughter. She's awesome, but
Yeah.
natural leader. But if you weren't raised that way, like now we have all these adult men that like I can walk into, and I have to be careful because I don't want to disparage the church too much, but I have said 1,000,000 times, I would never want my husband to be a deacon because they're pansies, right? That's not attractive to me at all. And they don't, if there's going to be a fight at City Hall, it's not going to come from the church men.
Right.
Yeah.
It's going to come from people like my husband. And so how do we
Like, can I tell a story real quick?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Our church, First Baptist Church, has been there since 1858 or something. Long, long time. It's right there in downtown, and they were going to do like an expansion. Remember this? This is probably about 10 years ago, and they were getting pushback from City Hall, and they didn't have a single member that had any contacts to City Hall. Church has been there 150 years, didn't know anyone. I mean, there's no excuse for that.
No standing in the community.
No,
Yeah.
there's no excuse for that.
Yeah. So we have these men that hopefully are watching and thinking, I want to be a man's man. Now, how do I become like Fred McCarty and Corey Huddleston and Mike? So like, what advice do you give them? Like, how do we don't want it to be like what you were saying, where it's a lick my wounds and I need to be better or different before I can be effective. Like, what makes these men what we want them to be?
I mean, I'm saying like what I did, just like even with the youth thing, I mean, it's like anybody could do that. So every other Saturday, you just get some fathers and sons together and go out to Grapevine Lake, and we just do like some SEER training, so survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, you know, but we'll also integrate, you know, business stuff. But it's really, even if you're not into all of that stuff, like do what you're good at. If you like to fish or if you like to do model trains, it doesn't actually matter. I mean, it's like just getting a community of people together. And what I've realized is like, whether it's a 2-year-old all the way up to a 17-year-old, and you know, any of the dads that come, we all have something to teach and we all have something to learn. So going into that with 100%, like, let the little guy show you things. But there's nothing as cool as being in the middle of the woods and watching a bunch of young boys running around with knives and axes. You know? It's just like, and a huge smile on their face, you know, just like they're.
So you think that's like a precursor? Because in the real world, when we're fighting political battles, it has nothing to do with being in the woods with knives. It's,
yeah.
But it's a.
I think
You learn how to operate within a group.
Yeah.
How to lead. Yeah, also, it's important to know how to follow. You know, without being obnoxious. You learn
also
how
they know how
to
to
deal
get
with
punched in
problems
the
and
face.
stuff. Yeah.
Right.
There were in fights when I was.
I'm so glad I'm a girl and I never got punched in the face.
There is that, you know, if we look back at kind of that jungle analogy, right? Like guys have to learn how to protect together, how to hunt together, how to build together, right? And I'm a massive proponent of the whole lone wolf thing is a myth.
Oh yeah,
It's
absolutely.
complete travesty that's
It's
been
completely destroyed 2 generations.
It really has, right?
Tell me more about that. This is new to me. I don't.
So the whole lone wolf myth, it's born out of individual rugged individualism and individual sovereignty and all that. Not bad things. I'm a individualist to a certain extent. But the lone wolf myth is basically you've got to do it all on your own. You can't have any help. Nobody's coming to your side. You gotta conquer the world by yourself, that's the surest way to die, right? And you think about
you need a community.
yeah.
So why do you say it's 2 generations of that?
Well, I mean, that's your boomers and most of your Xers
So
were taught to be these rugged individualists, which there's nothing wrong with, being strong and being kind of an individualist, but you have to be part of a community. You have to, especially in the political world, like you have to be part of a movement, especially now. It's probably the most critical thing that's out there is you have to be part of this.
So if a man is out there following you on Twitter or some of these names that you gave, how would they plug in? How would they find that community or the iron sharpens iron where they can grow in this way?
That's a good question.
I think it does fall back to, and this is a problem that I'm trying to solve as well. So for us, it's funny you mentioned Saturday mornings. So we've got a group of us that every Saturday morning we do a hard workout together. Right? It's a very functional training type
Is this
workout.
adult men
right?
or all ages?
This is adult men, and there are some young guys who come out. And we've married it with, we do a men's breakfast once a month at our church. And so the youth pastor and I are good friends, and he started bringing his youth guys. So like 6th grade on up. And so they get to do something difficult with the adult men and they get to interact and cross-pollinate. And so we've had some of those young guys that have started to come out on Saturday mornings when we're not doing a men's breakfast. And one of the things that's grown out of that is really, I'm a firm believer in brotherhood is built through adversity. It's built through challenge, right? Guys, people say guys grow together shoulder to shoulder, not face to face, right? Ladies sit down, have a cup of coffee. Man, they're best friends by the end of it. Guys, we become best friends when we're, overcoming a challenge or we're figuring out how to get the motor started.
Political realm.
Yeah. And I think those guys that you're talking about who they're like, man, I don't have anybody. I need somebody. Frankly, you got to start locally, and the church is the best place to do it.
It's a good place.
Yeah. And then there are organizations that they're trying to build local chapters of guys who they get together regularly, and whether it's revolves around fitness or survival or hunting or, there's a commonality that kind of can bring some guys together, and you start doing life together. And that's when you start to get a little more grit to you in handling, say, the political sphere. And you were asking, especially like, where are the guys in the church? Especially like deacons. Like, these guys have to start building that brotherhood and building that adversity. And I think part of the issue is we become victims of our own success. So we're so focused on career, we're focused on our church duties, focused on our family. I can't handle another thing. Meanwhile, that school board is allowing dozens and dozens of books into our schools,
and
right?
why is it not lined up with all the dads saying,
Precisely.
No.
I think I had said this at the 15-year thing. Like, imagine you've got a school board that's voting on these books, and you have 50 dads shoulder to shoulder in the back, arms crossed.
Yep.
That sends a message without anybody even saying anything, right? And once those guys start coming up to speak, it's like, oh, we've awoken a giant here. And I think, that's you've got to have those guys who are willing to step out and be a leader and start saying, Joe, Jim, Bob, I'm starting a Saturday morning thing. I want you guys there,
But what's the real way that a guy gets involved and changes it? Because from my perspective, like having kids, and let's just be honest, it's like that takes a lot of energy, and it's almost like a battle in and of itself, right? Because you're trying to keep your own kids from being indoctrinated in this, you're dealing with a lot there. So, but the other thing is, okay, if I'm going to get involved in the school board, one, like the preconception about that, of what it is, it's like, I'm not the type of person who's involved at the, the parent, teacher, what do they call it? PTO.
Yeah, PTO.
Yeah. Like, so, and I'm not into all that. I'm not a big cheerleader. I'm not, like, I just want to know if they're doing the bad things. But even then, like, I think politically, it seems like that stuff tends to kind of just like, it's the same fight over and over and over and over. It seems like, right? And so, like, if I'm looking at like the best possible outcome of my energy, I'm not always looking at, to go get involved in a political fight. It's like, is that the best use of my energy to fix that specific outcome, And so that's where the question for me becomes like how much energy I'm spending on one thing versus the other. And I've spent a lot of time on politicals, over the years, But I think it's like, as time has gone on, it's like, what is the most efficient way for me to really transform this thing? And I think it does come down to building relationships with people at the end of the day, because you can have the most influence with that. So as a man, if you're getting involved and you want to start a group, whether you're doing it or you're to set up and just build relationships with other guys, or you get other guys engaged in the process, it's not so much just about getting engaged in the process, but understanding why any of it matters. Because I don't think apathy doesn't move very much of anything, right? It's like, you see it like in Grapevine where we live at. I mean, the voter turnout's ridiculous. But it's not because people think voting doesn't really matter. It's probably a lot of the times like, what's the point? Like, it's always going to be this way. Like, people adapt that mindset. And if they don't have hope, then what are they doing anyway? So, like, I think it's getting a clear indication of, one, who's the enemy. That's one of the bigger problems right now with men, is we don't know who the enemy is, and our desire is to want to grab that enemy by the throat and make it pay. Right? And so when you don't have something you can do that to, it becomes very confusing and irritating, at least from my perspective, of like, and it's just like that constant reveling yourself up into that way of being, but you can't grab somebody by the throat. It's almost like,
It's more throat.
yeah, at some point I was like, I got to back away from this or it's not going to be good, so that's more the
a little tougher when you can't just club somebody over the head, right?
I mean, it's like the battle. I mean, especially if it's like stuff where it's just evil, and it's just like, do I really want to try and fight this in some easy way, or do I just want to grab the dude and
Which it's you voiced, it's kind of like, man, what do I put my energy towards? And I think that comes down to lane, right? So like, what's your lane, and recognizing, okay, where does my sphere of influence help affect? So maybe you're not running for school board, but man, you go there once in a while, especially if a big issue is kicking up, because you're trying to protect the community's kids from absolute degenerate perverts who want to shove this stuff down kids' throats. And I think with the enemy stuff, it's tough for us. I think because we've been so conditioned, so trained, all of us, to struggle to see evil for what it is. Because we live in such a relativistic world that it's oh, well, that's just the way they think, and that's just their opinion, and that's just their political ideology. And I think we're waking up, especially the conservative base, of like, this has gone too far.
Yeah.
This is just downright evil. And
we're called to hate evil.
Yeah. And I think for me, like what spurs me on and why I do what I do, and I hate politics, honestly. Mm-hmm. Like I can't stand it, but I do what I do because I look at my kids and it's like, I can either figure out and fight it now, or else my kids are going to be in a world of hurt, and I think a lot about like the founders And the fact that it wasn't just one day they were like, independence, like you look at the fight between the colonies and the crown, it was something like 120, 130 years of back and forth between them, right? And then that last 10 to 15 years, it really started to get hot. And those guys, they were done. Like, that's it. It's time to club somebody, and they didn't get violent about it until the crown got violent, but they were ready. They had hit that mental point of like, okay, it's time. Now, I'm not calling for violence. I'm not saying it's time for violence.
You heard it here, guys.
It's time to plant a tree. Is that what you're saying?
but I think we're in the stage where we can start like clearly labeling what is evil and what is wrong, and just saying, no, I'm not going to allow this.
And the church has been a big part of that. Like, they don't want to get involved. They don't want to call evil.
Right. Because they want to save people through kindness.
Yeah.
Let's say what it is. They want to save people through kindness. Well, I was listening to something.
The whole seeker thing.
I was listening to something, and the guy was answering a question. And the question was, my pastor's wife noticed that I like learning how to shoot guns, and I'm doing jujitsu, and I'm learning these boxing skills, and she thinks I have a heart of war, and that's not who Jesus would be, and I need to be more loving. And the question was like, what do you think of this? And I'm like yelling at the radio. I'm like, get away from her. She is the exact problem for guys in the church, because we've conceptualized that Jesus would never stand against evil. Jesus would never stand with the unpopular position, which the guy made everybody mad. You know, because he was standing on truth, and he didn't care what you thought or where he was going to tell truth. Now, he showed love, he showed grace, he showed mercy, but at the same time, he was willing to stand in a very unpopular way, and he had grit to him. And it's kind of like, we as Christian men, we've got to throw off this whole like, oh, we're not allowed to make anybody mad, because then we won't win them to Jesus.
Yeah.
No, it's the righteousness you stand on that will help win people to Jesus, Yeah.
I've always maintained that if you were more controversial, that you would win people to Jesus. I mean, strength is attractive. Strength draws people.
Yeah.
So I think that what I'm kind of gathering from what you're saying is that you don't necessarily gather as men because you want to go club someone over the head. You gather and you build these relationships, and then when an issue presents itself, you already have this unity, this team, this army, like we like to call the True Texas Army, right, is ready to engage as needed.
Yeah.
And maybe if you have men that are more passive, they are strengthened and encouraged by the men that are like those in this room, right? Like, oh, I don't have to be afraid of this. It's this isn't anti-Christian, or this doesn't make me a bad person. This is who I was made to be. And so when you have the groups meeting and the unity, it's empowering.
It's inspiring, right? And I think guys love heroes. I think when we're kids, it's kind of like, it's a star athlete or a movie star or a sports figure, right? We look up to heroes. We have this person, right? And we as guys, we love to find inspiration. And even as men, we can still find guys who inspire us to that next level. And I think we get it stuck in our head. Maybe it's part of the lone wolf thing, is like, we decide somewhere along the way, I'm not allowed to be inspired by anybody. But then that ends up cutting us off from seeing, because there's got to be somebody who will trailblaze. There's got to be that person who's willing to step out first. And once you get that guy, there will be more who will step out. And then you get the passive ones who are like, well, I can run support on this. I can show up and I can be a part of this.
At the very least, I won't condemn you for it.
Right, exactly. I won't get in your way.
That's all you can do.
And I think that's part of what inspires me is, I know there are those guys who did it. There are those guys who stepped out, and it's like, man, that's cool. takes some guts.
Yeah.
That's what man does.
Well, I think it only ever has to be a small percentage of it too.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, we have in our heads that I think we need to be 50% or more. We're going to lose the country kind of thing. And I don't think that that's really,
Yeah, it's a good point.
I don't think it's ever been that.
I think the same could be said about a men's group. So the first time I heard you speak, I mean, I'm like jumping out of my seat saying, we're going to start True Texas Men. We need a new group. And I still feel passionate about that needs to start. Now, it can't come from me. It needs to come from the men listening, or, it's not a woman's place to create this men's group, but it doesn't, in my head, everything we do has to be big and bold, but it could be 3 or 4 guys that are committed to meeting together and watch it grow from there if it grows. And if it doesn't, that's probably okay.
Yeah. With our fitness groups on Saturday mornings, we started out with like 4 or 5 guys, and we've got something like 55 guys that are in the chat now, and we typically have 20 to 25 that'll show up on a given Saturday.
So how did it start? It just took one person to say, "Hey, come over."
Yeah.
What advice would you have for people watching that are like, "Yeah, we need men's groups"?
So here's a good story. I was listening to Jim Ramos. I believe it was Jim Ramos, and he was talking about he wanted to start a Bible study, and he was a police officer or whatever. I think it was him, or he was interviewing a guy. Anyways, this guy was talking about he was a police officer. He wanted to start a Bible study. For 2 years, he sat in a parking lot by himself on a Thursday morning and read the Bible. And he was like, Lord, where is everybody? And nobody would ever show up. And then after 2 years, it broke, and people started coming. And it started growing. And I think it starts with one guy who's like, no, I want to start this and I want to do this. And it's going to be slow at first.
It's going to take sacrifice.
Going to take, yes. It's and perseverance through that sacrifice. Because I think guys get in their head, I'm going to start a group and I'll have 100 people show up, and 2 guys show up. Yeah. And it's like, all right, obviously that wasn't meant to be.
Or do I really want to give up my Saturday morning? I've got things to do.
Exactly. And that's something we talk about is like, you've got to show guys why it's worth it for them to step outside of their life to go to your Saturday morning thing. Mm-hmm. What's because we have a lot of important priorities in our lives. Sure. So what value is this? I've got to sacrifice something else early on a Saturday morning to come do this. There better be something worth it in this, and that's, it may sound shallow, but it's true, But I think for those guys who want to start it, it is that, like, stick to it. If it's on your heart, start it, stick to it, talk to your buddies, get your buddies to come out. Talk to guys you don't know very well, get them to come out, and you'll slowly see the wheels turn and things start to grow. I don't know. That's my thought, but
Corey, you've started some groups. Yeah,
it's probably not going to be as much of a like a hard thing to do as you might think that it is. If you focus it on things that you like, for example, like I like adventures, and things like that. So I tend to build things around adventures of some sort, So they're like, if I'm going to go do something, I'd rather have people around to do that anyway. But if you're like into model trains, start a model train, group, and it's like y'all are building that, and you can, like.
It's so easy for men because there's so many fun things that men get. Like my church is hosting a women's event and we're making soap. Like, I don't want to go to that. So, but the men do clay shoots and I don't know, all these fun things they do. So, yeah.
It's funny because
hey man,
about my
soap
church,
kept people alive,
right? It's important.
Pretty important. So.
It's funny because the women at our church have the same complaint. They're like, the guys get to do all the fun stuff and they get bacon, and it's like,
bacon, yes.
Yes, the ladies get mad because we have bacon, so they had bacon at their last breakfast.
Nice. But I will say, I don't jump in and say, well, how about the ladies? Let's do this. I just stay out of it. So I can't complain. So But you guys can start a group. So actually, I want to kind of wrap this up. And so I want to make sure that people listening understand that if you are at home and you want to start a True Texas Men group, we have resources, we have contact lists, we know people in your area, and we can say, hey, there's a TTP at home group that is going to be specific for men, and we're going to call it True Texas Men, and we'll help you start that. So we've got men here that will give you advice. It's really, the possibilities are endless, and we could sit on these sofas and we could talk about all the powerful, amazing things men could do all day long, because that's who God created you to be. So you just have to get up and do it, though. I think that's the difference, is that you know in your heart and your soul that you are a man and you're powerful and you can do these things, but then you have to actually do it. So, and maybe we'll do another one for women, because I'm sure women are hearing this and thinking, oh, great, now we've got all these toxic men, right? But I don't think that's the message here at all. So I just want you women to know that you're not forgotten. I do want to give a few announcements before we close, so that you know what's going on in October. Making the rounds through all of our satellites, we've got Bunny Pounds talking about Jesus and politics. So that kind of meshes with what we're talking about today. We have a big focus on prepping for the next session. So whether you're getting Texas Scorecard, Michael Quinn Sullivan, or one of the other partnership organizations that we work with, like Texans for Fiscal Responsibility or Abolish Abortion Texas, something like that. Those groups are making the rounds at all of our meetings to prepare us for January when the session starts, so we know what we're fighting for, what
it's going to be lit.
It's going to be lit. Yes, it's going to be good. And then we've got someone's making the rounds talking about the 30-30 land grab. I know that's a concern for many. We've got a movie night, Weapons of Mass Migration. And then we have all kinds of fun social events, which kind of fit into what we're talking about, is that you have to build community. You have to be shoulder to shoulder and doing things that are fun, because
we have men's softball tonight.
We have softball tonight. But we've got like a dog costume contest. I mean, that's not, you don't want to be involved, like you don't want to give your time to politics because it's such a battle and a burden all the time. But a dog costume contest, I mean, how fun is that? Just to build friendships and be refreshed by other people that are like-minded. We've got work parties going on in GOP offices, which really brings me to my next most important action item, is that you guys are going to be watching this in October, which means the election is right around the corner. So that has to consume any free time that we have. We have enough Republicans to win these elections if we can get them to the polls. So we've got groups that are hanging out at GOP offices and making calls, stacking up push cards to hand out, whatever it takes. And then once early voting starts, you may or may not be aware, but we have visibility to who has voted and who has not voted. So as early voting continues and we can look at a list and say, oh, my neighbor didn't vote yet, I'm going to go knock on my neighbor's door and say, go vote. Or I'm going to show up at the GOP office and start calling through people that normally vote and haven't yet, and answer their questions like, where do I vote? Or when can I vote? Or, get out the vote. That's my bottom line action item, is get out the vote. And then during the election, we need people working as election judges, election clerks. These are the people that are the eyes and ears to make sure the cheating doesn't happen. So we need people, maybe some men will step up and say, I don't mind going into the Democrat areas. I don't mind going into the scary inner city. I will be and you get paid for it, and you get trained, and you get paid during your training. So we're just asking you to step up. Either contact your county elections office or your county GOP office and figure out how you can make a difference. So that's all we have for today. I want to thank you so much. You are so inspirational to me, and hopefully to everybody that's listening. You guys obviously have an affinity for alpha males. So thank you both for being here. But why don't we toast before we close? Here's to Texas.
Here's the True Texas.
All right. Thanks, everyone.